"Help her, Robert," the soft voice whispered. Looking down, it's hard to argue. Stage 4 cancer. When Miss Ruth had been asked about her pain level earlier this morning, she replied with no hesitation, 10 out of 10. I had marked it down in the notes and felt my fair share of sadness for this old woman. "You know what to do," my sister had said, her glowing eyes staring into mine. No one could see my sister anymore since her death, except for me. It's funny, when my sister was alive, we weren't that close. But now, she was with me nearly every second. Now she was always there to guide me and help me through the harder choices in life. "Okay, Sarah," I replied, filling the syringe as far as it would go. If you work in healthcare, you know that upon each shift, the narcotics are measured by the oncoming nurse, but there are ways around that. As Miss Ruth's breathing slowed, I filled up the morphine with tap water and checked its levels before the next shift would. No change. I knelt down by the old woman and held her hand. Was I sorry for my part in this? Absolutely not. She was enduring more pain than anyone should have to. And before you judge me, I want to ask you this. Would you let your dog wither away and die from stage 4 cancer? Or would you take him to the vet and help him move on to the next life? Why should Miss Ruth be any different? "Go to the light," I whispered in her ear, and she did, her heart slowly stopping and a warm smile falling over her face. My only regret was that her family wasn't there when she had passed, but it wasn't worth the risk. People don't trust nurses and doctors like they used to, and there was more than a small chance that one of her family members might notice her increased dosage. This is how it had to be, and this is how it always had been. That night I took out my journal, strewn under my bed, and withdrew a small knife that was cradled inside it. I cut a small mark on the inside of my arm, and used the fresh blood as ink to write a single mark on the back page of the leather. 1. This made 65. Wow, was it really that many? "Hey Sarah," I shouted to the adjoining room. "Yes, brother?" she called back. "Would you believe we're at 65 already?" I replied, even louder than before. I couldn't help it. I was so damn proud of what we had achieved together. All these souls that had been given reprieve from pain and journeyed towards the light. "I'm proud of you, Robert," she whispered. "Now get some rest." My smile grew wider. I knew it wasn't good to be dependent on others for your feelings, but the thought of my family being proud of me filled my heart with joy. Sarah was the last one I had left, and even though she was a ghost or something, it felt like our relationship was more alive than it had ever been. Still, life is never without its challenges. 3 days later, a new patient was brought in under my care. Mr. Davis was a retired engineer and had recently been diagnosed with a fast-acting form of pancreatic cancer. "Get some rest," I whispered, filling the syringe up with morphine like I had done so many times earlier. But this time didn't go as planned. Mr. Davis gripped my wrist tightly and pulled my eyes in front of his. "I don't want any medicine," he said empathetically, and I could tell he meant every word. Still, I had a job to do. "Mr. Davis, it's just to dull the pain," I said, freeing my wrist from him and pushing the needle towards him. "I don't want the fucking medicine," he continued, his voice far too loud now to provide the concealed environment I needed. Okay, sir," I replied, turning my back and checking the morphine level on the bottle. He gave me an angry, hazy look and drifted off to sleep. That night, when I went back home, I prayed that she wouldn't find out. "God, please don't let her hurt me," I whispered, my hands locked together as I sat on my knees and looked over at a crucifix painting my mother had insisted I receive after her death. When I finished my prayers, I did something I hadn't done since we were children. I locked the door. It wasn't more than 5 minutes later when my sister's voice could be heard in the outside hallway and the scratching started. God, why were her nails so long now? Or do they continue to grow after you're dead? I always forgot.
"You didn't do God's work today, did you, Robert?"
I pretended to be asleep. I pretended that I didn't hear her, but it never worked.
"Robert!"
The dead voice screamed, the old house's very foundations shaking violently with her anger. I couldn't, okay? I called back. He told me he didn't want any. And with that, the steady scratching at the door increased. Its only interruptions being the even worse slams against the old oak frame she desperately tried to get inside. I tried not to think about the punishment that awaited if she did. Horror filled me now, as I could hear the hinges beginning to creak and bend further with each heavy jolt against it. Jumping out of bed, I braced my back against it. "Please, Sarah," I cried out gently, tears beginning to fill my eyes now. "Please don't hurt me," I called through the door, and after a moment, the slamming did stop. A steady scratching took its place that was somehow more gentle than before. "Robert, I just want what's best. You understand that, don't you?" I tried to hide my terror as I peeked through the small gap under the door. Her dead eyes were waiting for me. They glowed like embers as I stared back. "I know you do, sister."